Hi, welcome to worksheet P24. In this particular case, we are looking at trying to solve quadratic equations by a method called completing the square. The thing about completing the square is that it will work for every quadratic equation that we have. We can solve the problem using completing the square. Our method of factoring does not always work. Our method of finding the answer by using the square root method does not always work. But this method always will get you to the right answer. And that's one of the reasons it's such a important one. It's a little bit more complicated than the other ones. But if you follow the process and you get enough practice doing it, it starts to make a little bit of sense. I've actually had some students in the past that this was their favorite method. They just found it to be really, really interesting and found it to be really good. Now, one of the things that I like to do, I like to use this method, but the criteria that I use is that the b value needs to be even. If the b value gets odd, if it would be a 9 or an 11 or something like that, now all of a sudden it really complicates the problem. But if you have an even b value, this process works pretty slick. All right. So one of the things you have to understand is that we're going to be using the whole equation. We're not going to always be able to do an answer and then next answer. We're going to be working together. So the first part of the process of completing the square is going to be to get the c value away. We want to have a blank c value on the same side with the squared term. So we have n squared minus 18n is equal to negative 72. All right. Our job now is to find a number that we're going to add, and it is key that we're going to be adding this to both sides. All right, you'll never subtract it to both sides. You'll have to add it. But we have to figure out what that number is. Well, the way to find that number is to actually go to the next part of the line, and that is we're going to create a squared term. Okay? Now, one of the things we need to understand is that when we were factoring, what we knew is that if I were to end up with a problem that had it written as n minus something squared or n plus something squared, we would always write it twice. But the fact is, this number that we get in this add or subtract slot is always half of this number. That's just the way that it will always work. And so when I look at this problem, I say, hey, what's negative 18 cut in half? All right, negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. That's the number that goes there, minus 9. All right. Now, if you think about what would happen here, if we were to actually take n minus 9 times n minus 9, and do our double distributive concept, we would have our n squared, we'd have minus 9n, minus 9n. Notice those two guys make negative 18n. That was the key. But the last term that we get is going to be negative 9 times negative 9. We're going to get a positive 81. This negative 9 multiplied by itself is this number that we're going to put in this blank. So we have to work backwards a little bit to be able to make this work in the completing the square. And so this will actually factor to n minus 9 squared, right? It's n minus 9 made this term. But over here we end up with 9. And now what we're going to do is use the method we just learned on the previous lesson, on the P23, where if you have something squared, how do I get rid of it? I square root both sides. And so I end up with n minus 9 is equal to, square root of 9 is 3, or, and this is going to be really maybe something that's different, n minus 9 is equal to negative 3. And I want you to notice I now have two equations. Well, these two equations are super easy to solve. I just got to add 9 to both sides. In this case, I end up with n is equal to 12. When I add 9 to both sides, in this case, I get n is equal to 6. There's an or in between. There's my answer, folks. That means I could put either a 12 or a 6 in for the n here, and they would both work. All right, let's try that, hopefully maybe a little more smoothly this time in question number 3. First thing we do, get rid of the c value. We want a blank c. All right, so I have an x squared plus 16x is equal to negative 10. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to add to both sides of the equal sign. To do that, I'm going to go with x in a group squared. Means I got to cut this guy in half. 16 cut in half plus 8. All right, and if you recall, what's going to happen here is this number, this minus 9 up here, we had to square to get up to positive 81. We're going to square positive 8. We're going to get 64. We're going to add 64 to both sides. So we end up with 54 on the right side. We square root. X plus 8 is equal to, now square root of 54, that one's not easy to know, 7.35. I'm going to go to 2 decimal points here. 7.35 in this case. Or x plus 8 is equal to negative 7.35. And now, easy algebra, I'm going to subtract 8 to both sides. I get x is equal to negative 0.65. Use your calculator on that. 7.35 minus 8, negative 6.5 or 0.65. And over here, put my word in, going to minus 8 to both sides. And I end up with x is equal to negative 15.35. Double check that on your calculator. 7.35 negative minus 8, negative 15.35. There's our answer, folks. Those are the two numbers. Now, there's no way we would have gotten that answer from our problem if we were trying to use factoring. We couldn't factor this method. We couldn't use solve by square root method. Completing the square is one of the methods that will work to be able to solve these guys. All right, let's finish out number 5. First thing we do, clear out the c value. We have an x squared minus 8x is equal to negative 4 plus 5 is 1. Got to figure out what I'm going to add to both sides. To do that, I'm going to cut the negative 8 in half, put it in the square. I have to square that minus 4. It's going to be a plus 16 to both sides, so I end up with a 17 here. When I square root both sides, x minus 4 is equal to whatever the square root of 17 is. 17 square rooted, 4.12. Or x minus 4 is equal to negative 4.12. And I'm ready to solve both equations. I'm going to add 4. X is equal to 8.12. Or I'm going to add 4 here. X is equal to negative 0.12. Those are the two numbers that I could put in for x, and both of them would make that work. All right. This takes some practice. Take your time on it. Follow the pattern that we did. Write down some notes so you know the process to go. Work on the 3 problems on the right. Good luck. Send those in to me. You might need more than one shot at doing this. This is not one that I'm going to figure that you're going to figure out right away. So go through, make some errors, figure out what you're doing wrong, fix those errors, and you will eventually get it. It's kind of a cool process once you get the hang of it. Good luck.